The one interview was so awful that Carson thought about leaving that evening. Johnny Carson's unwavering elegance and deft management shaped late-night television for 30 years. Carson remained composed and professional during more than 4,500 shows and 22,000 guests, which became his signature style. Carson never ever lost his cool on air, regardless of awkward situations, bad jokes, or challenging celebs. One of America's most renowned authors made an appearance on The Tonight Show in 1975 in a state so startling that it not only derailed an interview, but also almost put Carson's illustrious career on hold. "I've never seen Johnny that upset before or after," said a former NBC executive who saw the fallout from what many claim was the worst interview in the history of the show. He wasn't only upset about a poor part, he was doubting everything. Whether he even wished to stay in television, his authority over the program, and the network's backing. He had never been this close to leaving. Today, we're sharing the complete, unedited account of the interview that was so disastrous that Carson himself ordered all copies destroyed on the night that television's most unflappable host, Truman Capote, reached the breaking point with his final Tonight Show appearance. We must first comprehend what set this specific interview apart from the innumerable other challenging guests Carson had dealt with over his career, and why this 130-minute session embodied all of Carson's worst fears regarding live television. Correct. Additionally, I believe you stated that you believed the majority of performers and actresses were stupid. Is that essentially what you stated, or am I misquoting you? Yes. Indeed, I mentioned Truman Capote's last drunken appearance in the middle of the 1970s. Truman Capote was among the most well-known writers in America by the summer of 1975. Cold Blood, his masterpiece, transformed literary journalism. His unique voice and unusual personality had made him not only a literary star, but also a celebrity, even though earlier novels, like Breakfast at Tiffany's, had been turned into Hollywood masterpieces. He frequently appeared on talk shows, where his wit and rumors about the wealthy and well-known always delighted viewers. Capote has already made several appearances on The Tonight Show, typically sharing endearing stories about his well-known acquaintances and making literary critiques in his trademark high-pitched voice. Their conversations were usually enjoyable for Carson, who thought Capote's blend of celebrity dish and intellectual weight was ideal for late-night TV. According to a Tonight Show producer who worked on numerous of Capote's appearances, Johnny had a sincere admiration for Capote as a writer. He believed that Truman, who was both entertaining and a literary figure, represented a certain cultural elevation for the program. In the past, their conversations had always gone smoothly. But as soon as Capote arrived at the NBC studios on the night of the disastrous appearance, suspicions were raised. The production staff became concerned when the author, who had been struggling with progressively serious alcohol and drug misuse issues, became severely impaired. He slurred his words, stumbled while standing, and exhibited unpredictable behavior. He could barely walk to the green room, remembered a production assistant during that night's events. His handler, I think it was his lawyer, was basically holding him upright. The executive producer was immediately told by our talent coordinator, "We can't put him on air like this." However, nobody wanted to be the one to inform Johnny that they had to abruptly cancel a segment with Truman Capote. The only hint that Capote appeared a little worn out was given to Carson, who was renowned for isolating himself from the audience prior to the performance in order to preserve spontaneity. The host was clearly astonished by Capote's state when the interview started. When Capote wandered onto the set and remembered a cameraman who was working that evening, Johnny's eyes widened. He was literally calculating in real time, as you could see. Should I try to salvage this, or should I end it now? Recall that for a large portion of the nation, this was live television. There was no simple solution. The next half hour was spent watching television that got worse and worse. Capote babbled on a variety of subjects, hardly able to construct meaningful sentences. The author would start answers that faded into muttered non-sequiturs whenever Carson tried to steer the discussion toward Capote's writing. He seemed to completely forget his location on multiple occasions. According to a reporter who watched the interview from backstage, Carson was making every effort to craft a cohesive section. He was completing Truman's sentences, correcting him when he went off topic, and frantically searching for questions that were easy enough for Capo to respond to. Seeing a skilled juggler attempt to maintain broken dishes in the air was like that. The tipping point was reached when Capo started naming names and discussing possibly libelous situations while making direct accusations regarding the personal lives of a number of well-known celebrities. Recognizing the legal risk, Carson tried to shift the topic, but Capo insisted on going back to the rumors. When Johnny moved to the ad, a stage manager who was standing slightly off camera was visible. As soon as the red light went out, Carson's smile was gone. Turning to face his producer, he ordered, "Get him out of here now." It was not a recommendation. It was a directive. I had never heard him speak in such a tone before. Carson rarely leaves the stage in the middle of an interview, but he did so during that commercial break. Several witnesses said that he went straight to his office and shut the door. Announcer Ed McMahon informed the audience that Capo wasn't feeling well and that the show would go on to the next part when the show resumed after the break. When the piece was over, Johnny was enraged. "Why do I even do this show anymore?" he asked, according to some crew members. A former author recalled, "He felt ashamed. It wasn't just performative anger," he said. "It wasn't simply poor television. It served as a reminder that when things went wrong, he had very little control." He stated, "If this is what it's going to be, maybe I'm done." Few people at the time understood how severely the incident had damaged Carson's faith in The Tonight Show's structure, despite the fact that his rage at the failed segment was clear. In a rare display of weakness, Carson told his close colleagues that the Caput interview revealed basic problems with the program's operation. A seasoned producer clarified, "Johnny told a few of us afterward that the incident made him question everything about how we screened guests. He replied, 'If we can't prevent something like this, what's the point of all our preparation?' He was honestly debating whether he wanted to carry on with a show where he may always be embarrassed in front of the public." Beyond the particular episode, Carson's discontent with NBC extended to more general grievances. He reportedly threatened to leave the network if his issues weren't addressed during a contentious meeting with network officials the next day, where he wanted more control over pre-screening and guest selection. An NBC executive who attended said the discussion was tense. Johnny hardly ever gave ultimatums or threats. He didn't have to. The mere suggestion that he might go was enough to send everyone into a frenzy because of how powerful his position was. On the moment, the network president essentially promised that the Caput event would never occur again. The interview's aftermath had both short-term and long-term effects. NBC consented to improve the pre-in procedure and granted Carson's crew more power to postpone guest appearances. In the event that such circumstances occurred again, segments would no longer only move forward to prevent scheduling issues at the last minute. More importantly for Capo, the episode essentially put a stop to his association with The Tonight Show. Capo was discreetly taken off the list of possible invitees, although he was never formally banned like some troublesome visitors were. Capo's appearance was seen by Carson, who rarely took offense at minor errors or subpar performances, as a violation of the fundamental professional decency he expected from visitors. According to a talent coordinator from that era, Johnny made a distinction between guests who were disrespectful of the show itself and those who were just anxious or ill-prepared. It was not only unprofessional to come on in that state. "Your show isn't important enough for me to be sober," Carson interpreted Capo's statement as basically meaning. Johnny was unable to forgive that. Carson's extraordinary request regarding the broadcast was perhaps the clearest indication of how profoundly the episode shook him. During a time before home recording was common, the network's own archives were the main source of show preservation. Multiple reports claim that Carson personally asked that the Caput segment never be included in any clip shows or retrospectives and be taken out of all tape recordings. According to a former NBC archivist, Johnny wanted no record of that night to exist. While the majority of Tonight Show programs were meticulously preserved, that particular portion was essentially obliterated. That was not often how Johnny used his strength. Normally he was content to display his gaffes and embarrassing moments, but the Kapow interview struck a deeper chord. He believed it reflected poorly on Kapow and the performance itself, so he didn't want it saved. Carson continued to use the Kapow episode as the standard for an inappropriate guest appearance in private discussions with staff for years after it happened. He would occasionally merely inquire, "Are we looking at another Kapow situation?" The question alone was enough to make bookers reconsider when extremely challenging celebrities were suggested for the show. The narrative is especially moving because it depicted the meeting of two outstanding careers at opposite stages of their development. Carson's influence on American culture was at its height, and he was the undeniable king of late-night television. In contrast, Kapow was beginning the protracted, depressing deterioration that would characterize his latter years. Kapow's decline quickened later that year as his acquaintances in society became estranged from him after parts of his unfinished work, Answered Prayers, were published. A literary critic who followed Kapow's career said that, in a sense, his Tonight Show appearance marked the beginning of the end for Kapow in the mainstream. Prior to it, his substance abuse problems were well known but were seen as a natural aspect of his unique personality. The public narrative shifted after Carson. Not only was he colorful, he was unstable, unprofessional, and might be dangerous to watch live. The incident forced Carson to contemplate for a while, which improved his attitude toward the show in the end. He gave leaving The Tonight Show some serious thought, but ultimately agreed to give him more authority over all aspects of the show, including broadcast scheduling and guest selection. Although it almost ended Kapow's career at the time, it provided Carson with the power to establish the circumstances that would allow him to maintain his rule for an additional 10.5 years. As a last irony, there are still claims that at least one recording of the interview survived in private hands, despite Carson's order to delete all official copies. On occasion, former NBC staff members mention having viewed the video, characterizing it as far more unsettling than current reports indicate. However, as a testament to Carson's resolve to obliterate the one night when television's most composed host almost left it all behind, no authentic copy has ever come to light. A side of Johnny Carson that the public rarely saw during his 30 years as America's late-night companion, a fiercely protective professional whose composed facade concealed deep anxieties about control, quality, and reputation, is shown in the nearly disastrous Kapow interview. Beneath the kind grin and easygoing manner lay a perfectionist who knew that upholding certain standards, even when doing so meant making tough choices, was essential to his success. The way this narrative highlights the special challenges of Carson's position is what makes it so important. Carson performed live for a large portion of the nation, in contrast to most television hosts who could cut out awkward parts or just say they're sorry for a few blunders. This created a vulnerability that was not entirely mitigated by his vast talent and knowledge. His underlying fear of his chosen medium, that one catastrophic segment could undo years of meticulous work, was brought to light by the Kapow incident. The way Carson handled this crisis, almost giving up but then exploiting it to gain more authority, is a perfect example of the strategic thinking that allowed him to hold on to his job for so long. He turned a moment of professional vulnerability into leverage that improved his hand with the network rather than just enduring the humiliation. The financial savvy that frequently went overlooked behind Carson's friendly on-air presence was characterized by this capacity to turn potential catastrophe into opportunity. Carson's resolve to destroy any documentation of the interview may be the most telling, a surprising move for a man who usually accepted the odd on-air incident. This remarkable reaction implies that the Kapow incident affected more than just professional pride. It jeopardized Carson's carefully cultivated audience relationship. The unspoken assurance that even while The Tonight Show could surprise you once in a while, it would never actually make you uneasy in your own living room. In the end, the account of that fateful night in 1975 gives us a crucial new perspective on Johnny Carson. Behind the laid-back, unflappable host was a man who understood how easily everything could fall apart and was resolved to prevent it from ever happening again, even if it meant considering leaving the most coveted position in television. Perhaps the greatest credit to Carson's professionalism is that the majority of viewers were unaware of how close they were to losing him too soon. The problem was kept confidential. The video was ruined. Carson appeared to be completely carefree as he returned to his desk the next evening. Making the incredibly challenging task of hosting The Tonight Show seem easy was perhaps the consummate professional's greatest talent.